Hi, welcome to this session 7, and we are looking at implementing or actual conducting of evaluation of humanitarian action, and basically we are looking at the designs and methods that evaluators can use or rely on to generate the information and to be able to get findings to answer evaluation questions that need to be answered depending on the information demands of primary intended stakeholders. So in the previous sessions, we've looked at deciding to evaluate, initiating and framing evaluation, and then planning and managing evaluation of humanitarian action. So now all that involved planning, designing questions, choosing the type of evaluation, selecting the evaluation team, drawing the terms of references, and doing the inception reports, and then approving it, and to be able to carry on the evaluation. So in this session, we are focusing on evaluation designs for answering the evaluation questions, sampling approaches, and field data collection methods. So again, reminding ourselves as always, systematic evaluation of humanitarian intervention or humanitarian action involves systematic, impartial, objective examination of humanitarian action or humanitarian intervention, if you will, to be able to test whether they were worth implementing, and also drawing lessons for policy to be able to make evidence-based policies and practices, but also to improve on accountability and learning. So, evaluation designs for answering evaluation questions. The designs can be structures of data collection and analysis, while methods are processes on how the data would be gathered. So, if you can categorize them, you could say that the designs are broad, while methods are specific ways or specific strategies of gathering data that the designs were structured to gather. And you have a variety of designs, but of course the evaluation questions will determine what kind of designs, what kind of methods, what kind of sampling techniques or sampling approaches would be employed. Okay, so but also consider the nature and context and constraints and budget and data and so on. Of course, also looking at what Bamberger talks about when he talks about real world evaluation. Okay, so some of the approaches include qualitative, which is more of positivist or objective or numerical or deals with statistics. Okay, the other one is quantitative, which is more of I think there is an interchange here. We might need to check, and so the quantitative involve positivist, objective, and numerical, and they deal with statistics, which is to do with numbers. The qualitative has to do with interpretivist ontology or epistemological viewpoints and methodologies, which deal with words, and they are more subjective in this case, and therefore more involving the participants in depth. Okay, then of course the evaluation questions would determine what kind of approach that would be used, and each has its advantages and disadvantages. But mostly you'll find evaluations using mixed methods, whereby they employ both qualitative and quantitative to be able to improve on credibility, trustworthiness, and quality of evaluation. So three broad designs, whereby we have experimental, whereby a control and intervention groups are randomly assigned before the intervention is implemented. So take an example. The agency UNICEF can decide, so okay, they want to test if food supply has an effect on reduction in malnutrition among children in refugees settings. So they can choose to say, okay, we are going to do an RCT, randomized control trial. And in this case, they would sample a whole bunch of children, and then with the same characteristics, and then they distribute food among some participants, and certain type of food among, they distribute certain type of food depending on what they want to test among a sampled category of those children, and others which would be the control group will not receive the food. And then after, they can test whether those that received food were able to reduce levels of malnutrition compared to those that did not receive the food. But of course, these have ethical issues that everyone has, especially in a humanitarian setting. Everyone has a right to receive this kind of and that's why you find in mostly in humanitarian evaluation, they use non-experimental designs, because everyone then has a chance to benefit from whatever intervention is given. So you have experimental designs, then you have quasi-experimental. In quasi-experimental, instead of control, they choose a comparison group, an intervention group. So in this case, again, they can use matching to choose the comparison group, whereby the comparison group would have some characteristics, the characteristics similar to those groups that would receive an intervention. And then at the end of the at the beginning and at the end of the intervention, they can draw a comparative kind of assessment to see whether the groups that received the intervention have been able to improve on whatever, or to effect changes that are intended. Okay. Then there is non-experimental, where there is no comparison group or no control groups, and everyone has a chance to. Everyone receives or benefits from is supposed to benefit from the intervention. But of course, not that everyone benefits, but that's the intention. They are all refugees, therefore they might, or they are all affected by the humanitarian situation, and therefore they should be able to benefit. Now, the non-experimental design, as I already said, no comparison between assisted and non-assisted group. So within non-experimental group, so you have most commonly used in evaluation of humanitarian action, because they are less demanding, they are more flexible, they are less costly, and the ethical issues are limited compared to the quasi-experimental and experimental design, and they can answer almost all types of questions for even qualitative and quantitative data. Okay, but if you look at RCTs or experimental, mostly they are objective and they are dealing with statistical evidence, and they are more objective than compared to the non-experimental designs. Examples could be case studies, whereby a case is selected, maybe a certain zone in a camp to be studied, considering what kind of intervention was given, maybe voucher to access health services or food distribution and so on, or inputs for agriculture farming. Could be process reviews, it could be outcome reviews, whereby maybe they can use most significant outcomes, or they can use participatory designs where community members are more at the center, or the affected people are more at the center of the evaluation. Okay, so you can check the weaknesses and strengths of each in Buchanan, Smith, and others. The quasi-experimental designs use a non-randomly selected comparison group, and whereby the intervention group is evaluated compared to the comparison group, at one point or over time to check whether there are differences in the effects after intervention within the intervention. I mean, the group that got the assistance. Okay, so it's a single group. A single group is compared over time. That's another alternative. Okay. So common selection methods of those comparison groups is by propensity score matching, PSM, whereby certain the comparison group has the same almost the same similar characteristics as the intervention group. So certain approach or methods or techniques can be used to be able to select those groups that have similar characteristics. Or okay, so you could, for instance, use a certain cutting edge or income level between those who are to receive the intervention and those who wouldn't receive. So at that point, let's say those who earn less than 500, maybe those who earn less than 100 dollars per month would be the ones that receive the intervention, and so those who are close to 100 would be the ones that would be used as comparison group because they would almost have the same characteristics. Okay. So they provide rigorous evidence of the effectiveness of the intervention. Of course, there's not much to worry about ethical issues as those that are in experimental designs. But of course, comparison groups are susceptible to experimental contamination, whereby, for instance, some other agencies are doing the same intervention, or those that are benefiting from the intervention are also extending the assistance to those who are not, those who did not receive the intervention, or the comparison group is learning from the intervention group. For instance, if you are talking about empowering refugees or empowering communities that are recovering from a certain disaster, and then you're empowering them with these kinds of skills of farming and so on, the comparison group can always come and learn from them. And therefore, when it comes to the actual assessment and evaluation, you might get information that is not clear because there was such kind of contamination. Then, so examples of these quasi-experimental groups could be interrupted time series, whereby after every certain period of time, then the evaluations are done. Difference in difference, whereby they assess what kind of differences in terms of change has happened over time between comparison and intervention group, or before and after comparison, or you can do comparison groups, or you could do regulation discontinuity, or treatment discontinuity comparison, or natural experiment. All these are part of the quasi-experimental designs that a certain evaluation can use. Okay. Then you have experimental designs whereby the units of analysis are randomly assigned, and each target element has equal chances to belong to either group. Either group, I mean by intervention group or control group. But of course, yeah, they are better at testing attribution compared to others, because it's difficult. It would be difficult to test attribution when you're using non-experimental, because here you can be able to say, okay, these the intervention group was able to receive the intervention and the control group did not, and therefore you can be able to ascertain that the changes that you identify in the intervention group surely can be attributed to that particular intervention. If food distribution was done to certain marginalized groups, marginalized affected people that earn maybe less than 10,000 Uganda shillings per month, then you would be able to say, okay, the improvement by the cash transfers has been the improvements within households can be attributed to a certain cash transfer project, okay, among those that intervention group, okay, compared to the other ones that did not receive. But of course, experimental designs have ethical issues. If you consider the humanitarian principles that intervention should be on a need basis, not random, okay. Examples of course, experimental designs include randomized control trials. I already talked about that. Now, there are issues of bias when it comes to selection of certain designs, and bias threats accuracy. Threatens accuracy, reliability, trustworthiness, credibility of findings. So, bias can arise from evaluators' prejudicial judgments or from the designs themselves. So, no one is immune to evaluation, to the biases, but there must be some strategies to consider while designing the evaluation, but also while selecting the team that would do evaluation, and also putting some measures to address evaluations that arise as evaluation is happening. So you have design bias, which can result from systematic design errors, maybe sampling, maybe measurement. You have source bias resulting from specific choices of choice. Maybe you are more interested in men, and yet also women are affected by a cash transfer intervention. Publication bias resulting from specific choices of publication, maybe for desk review, you did not consider others for translation purposes. Could be also attached to maybe demographic related characteristics, maybe gender, or you are interviewing old people than youth, or you are interviewing the disabled or non-disabled, or you are interviewing the whites and you leave the blacks. So such also that is bias. Or you interview only people that are on the roadside rather than going deep to the village or the area that is being evaluated to be able to get those that are not easily accessed. So there are different ways of addressing bias during data collection. You can do triangulation, you can avoid roadside interviews, you can do gender balance in the composition of team, evaluation team or participants, whereby if you are, for instance, holding focus group discussions, then you hold focus group discussions for both men and women, okay, not only men, or for youth and the adults, because the intervention, if the intervention was entirely for the entire community, then everyone has experiences the intervention differently. So you may want to get all those perspectives. So not to be biased, you look at the composition of the team and participants. You do routine cross-checking to verify with the participants, use consultants as team leaders so that you do not have a biased leadership. You avoid generalizations, over representations, especially where you have used experimental designs, because in that case you only have one category that is receiving. So if you overgeneralize when it comes to scaling such an intervention, then it might become a problem, because we tend to avoid the one size fits all aspect. But of course also controlling by not informing the evaluators about the purpose of treatment, because otherwise they might also be biased themselves. So all those are measures to control bias. Now, when you have already designed and considered what approaches to take, then you consider how you can do sampling. And sampling is the process of selecting certain elements or subjects from the target population to participate in the evaluation study. And therefore, after you have sampled these and they've given you information, then you can do some kind of generalization, or you can do some kind of representation to say that, okay, in this area, food distribution or cash transfers or distribution of mosquito nets did not work because of this and this and this. Okay. So that's the purpose of sampling, because we cannot engage everyone. Otherwise, that would require time and more additional resources, and in terms of capacity and finance. Okay, and yet with humanitarian action situations, you always need time within. You always need results within certain time to be able to make effective changes and practices within policies. Okay, so both can be done for primary and secondary studies. And the main sampling categories include non-random sampling and random sampling. For non-random sampling, the selection is based on the same characteristics, okay, usually for qualitative. But for random, is usually for quantitative, and it's based on each number of elements has equal chances to be selected. So you can use simple random sampling or systematic sampling or whatever. We want to look at this in a moment. So there are common sampling problems in evaluation of humanitarian action. Over-reliance on convenience, okay, availability of sample, who is available. Maybe you've gone to the distribution center and the people that are there are the ones that you might ask, okay, and that would create bias and also give a skewed data. Insufficient random sample size, which can affect generalization and therefore would generate recommendations or conclusions that are not representative. Selection bias, I've already talked about that, and then unclear reporting of sampling approaches within reports, because if you should be able to write in the reports how you were able to sample, and therefore pointing out weaknesses and strength of your sample strategy, to be able to inform the readers or the evaluation managers to say, okay, we can use this because the sample was like this, okay. So, non-random sampling. As I said earlier, we consider sample size, and the sample size is the representation or is in under non-random sampling. Sample size does not matter. Okay, doesn't matter because we rely more on data circulation, and data circulation means that you collect data qualitatively that until you reach a certain moment when you cannot get new knowledge or new information regarding the questions that you want to answer. So when you get to that saturation point, that's when you can stop. Sample size only matters a lot when it comes to random sampling. So suggestions on sample size, of course, depend on the design and data collection methods and so on. It's not appropriate for any other situation, but we can say that non-random sampling can be appropriate when resources are limited in terms of time and money. So you just meet people and ask key informants and so on and get the general information. Or when access is difficult, take an example in humanitarian situations. I mean, let's say in conflict areas where humanitarian action is happening, you may not access some respondents. You have, of course, there are if there are quick decisions that are needed. If specific group is targeted, or if the target is very small, in that case you can use your qualitative methods. Some of the types of non-random sampling is convenience or availability sampling, whereby you interview people or engage people, you collect data from people who are available or convenient, conveniently available to answer your questions. Or you can use purposive sampling, where you specifically select certain target population to sample, maybe key informants, maybe you want to general information regarding how cash transfer projects are working within a certain country, and then in this case you could choose maybe country representatives to give you the general idea, or community leaders or refugee representatives and so on. This quota sampling, whereby the population is divided into mutually exclusive categories, and then you use other sampling methods to be able to collect data. But there is one other which is novel, whereby respondent whereby respondents assist in sampling. So you begin with one central respondent and then they lead you to other respondents, and those other respondents all lead you to others. Take an example. If you are, let's say you are evaluating on certain issues, let's say those who access, the refugees that access HIV and ARVs, antiretroviral treatments, or those that are experiencing gender-based violence within camps. They always know each other, so some can refer you to those other respondents. Okay. Then for non-random for random sampling, the sample size matters, because at the end of the day, we want to do generalization and representation of findings. Okay, it matters, it's very key. So it's essential that you select appropriate sample size, and usually random sampling is always done for large n. So large n in terms of maybe where you have a bigger population that you want to collect data from. Okay. The more appropriate the sample size, the more the greater the representation or generalization of findings. You have types of random sampling. You have simple random sampling, for instance, where you can use rotary kind of technique, put your papers of certain respondents in a jar, and then you pick at random depending on the number you want. You can use systematic random sampling, where you have a sample frame and you calculate the sample size, and then you use intervals to select respondents. You have pseudo random sampling, whereby you do not have a certain sampling frame, and then you first use purposive sampling, and then after you apply random sampling to be able to select those that you want to participate in the maybe answering questionnaires and so on, or in participating in the survey. You have cluster sampling, where the number of locations sampled each with specific cases. Maybe you want to do clusters of zones, of refugee zones in the camps and so on. Stratified sampling, whereby you first divide the population into mutually exclusive segments, and then you apply simple random sampling to select from each of those strata. Okay. But again, consider other differential characteristics such as gender, age, and so on when you are sampling. So it depends on how you want, whom you want to participate, and what kind of data you want to answer your evaluation questions. Okay. So there are the estimating the sample size is very important, but it depends on the total number of population, and the determination of sample size is usually established using formulas or calculators. You can use online calculators, but also you can use established formulas. Okay. And those formulas already have certain have already been tested, and they have certain categorization of sample size versus the total population. That, for instance, if you have 100, then you should be able to select 90 to participate in a survey. If you have 10, then use all of them. So depending on the total number of population, and then you can use calculators or formulas to be able to determine the sample size. So, and again, the consideration of whether you want proportional or non-proportional samples. So, for instance, maybe you say in a certain zone, there are 100 refugees, and in another one there are 200 refugees. So you could consider, for purposes of generalization, you may want to take up non-proportion, so that you get equal percentages depending on the total population that are from those. So the choice depends on the purpose of evaluation and characteristics of the population, of course. So some key issues to consider when estimating the sample size: the confidence interval, which has to do with the range within which we expect the value. So you could usually, the example could be that maybe the marginal error would be plus or minus 5%, or We also have confidence level, which is the probability that the value in the population as a whole will fall within the confidence level. So the confidence level is whereby you are sure that okay, there is a certain probability that that particular population would be able to give you uh, you would be confident that the information you have fits within that particular categorization. So an example could be that you have 95 confidence level, which means that there is 5% chance of false positive results that you would get. Okay, and of course that depends again on the sample size that you would want to select. So sometimes people use 5, others use 7, and others use 10. But beyond 10, then you run a chance of getting evidence that is not representative or that cannot be generalized enough to. But of course, even other, you find other methods that even can say that okay, even 65% representation or confidence level would do. Then you have standard deviation, which measures the variability of parameter. So you could look at all these from. I mean, of course, these are technical terms that need more experts to practice. So, but you can always do this. Then you have effect size, whereby sometimes if you overestimate or underestimate, then that can have an effect on your on your on your on, on your evidence that you would generate. So it has to do with the proportionate difference between the variable of interest in the treated and the control group. So this is more when you're doing comparisons between the two groups. Then you have also statistical power. So for instance, the probability that a negative result is not a false negative. So, okay, 1 minus the risk of false negative results. So in this case, you are considering, for instance, a power of 70% means that there is a 30 probability. There is a 30% probability of failing to detect the significant difference if there is one, of course, of a false negative result. Okay, so the higher the power, statistical power, the more advantage that you have. Okay. Of course, there is also sampling for mixed methods. It requires both non-random and random, since you are using both qualitative and quantitative, and since you are also going to generate both subjective and objective kind of data. Again, numerical versus words. Okay, so humanitarian evaluators need to justify the choices and explain why and how certain choices were made, and for certain purposes I mean, for justification for certain kinds of findings that they get. Of course, putting into consideration that the small numbers better offer explanations of what happened than large numbers, and in that case, better consider qualitative than quantitative. But you can also use mixed in terms of sequential exploratory designs or sequential explanatory designs, or you can do embedded designs whereby you do both one within the other, or you can do multi-level, or you or transformation mixed methods, or think about all those different kinds of mixed methods. So again, depending on the population number and depending on the sample size you want to, or the characteristics of the population that you want to get information from. Okay, so we've looked at the designs. We've looked at after you have your designs and approaches, and then you have considered, you have determined your sample size. Now you consider what kind of data collection methods you would use. Okay, and as you can see, we have moved from all these other previous stages, and now we are preparing to go and collect data. Okay, so fieldwork methods are determined by evaluation questions. And again, you consider budget. What kind of resources do you have? What kind of time do you want to invest in? Do you want to invest in little time? If you want to invest in little time, then you use surveys. Then you also consider ethical issues and logistics. in terms of how data will be collected. So one example of field data collection methods is interviewing technique, whereby you have dialogues and you interact with the respondents or participants of certain evaluation, to give you the information. And it is more, interviewing is qualitative in that case, and therefore you can use qualitative approach or qualitative designs. There are three categories. You have structured interviews, whereby you have strict protocol that you want to follow, and mostly this also is done for surveys. So as the researcher or evaluator, when you get to the field, there are specific questions that have been set. You do not go beyond those. Okay, but then you have some structured interviews, whereby even if you have set questions, you can probe for more information where you are not getting the information you exactly want. Okay, because respondents always sometimes do not get your question well, or they are giving you detailed information that is far from what you want to find out, or they are just giving you simple answers and you want to get more details. So that's the advantage of semi-structured interviews. You can probe. But then you also have unstructured interviews, where you have an open conversation with people, maybe on a certain theme. Maybe you're just conversing with farmers within a refugee camp to find out maybe how they have been able to get to change their livelihoods following a certain intervention, maybe distribution of farming inputs and so on. Okay, and of course you must have interpreters when it comes to interviews. Okay, interpreters are very important, and in most cases you'll find that you have evaluators who are not so much familiar with the context or local languages, and therefore in that case you need interpreters to be able to interpret for you the context, but also to be able to help you to connect well with the respondents or participants. Okay, but this use of interpreters of course needs some additional resources, and therefore those should have been budgeted for during your planning and management phase. Okay, and some of these interpreters might need some debriefing and training to be able to help you give you correct quality data. Otherwise you risk getting information that might not be focused on the theme or specific questions. Okay, so you have qualitative interview methods, which you have in-depth interviews or one-on-one. You have key informants interviews, whereby you ask maybe country representatives. For instance, you have focus group discussions, whereby you gather a certain group and then you engage them in a certain thematic way of giving you information. You have group interviews, and then you have household interviews, whereby you interview household members, or if they have benefited from a certain maybe cash transfer also. You have formal meetings with community structures, maybe community leaders, whereby they would give you some answers regarding certain interventions. Some key issues to consider here include power differences. So when you are, for instance, doing focus group discussions, you may want to consider not to integrate community leaders with their subjects, because there are some issues that the subjects might not want to talk about when their leaders are available, or power issues to do with, for instance, if you are doing a household interview, you might not want to. You might consider issues of gender relations, whereby some issues can't be talked about when the heads of households are there. Okay, so those are issues that you may want to consider. Or convenience. For instance, you are interviewing about a certain intervention that aimed at addressing gender issues or gender-based violence within, among refugees. Okay, so in that case, you may not want to interview a woman or a man when when their partners are present. Okay, Also, you can look at issues of observation of non-verbal cues or elements when you are doing your interview. The other methods include surveys, whereby you're looking at issues of presentations, okay, or actual situations. And some of these survey methods include nutritional surveys. If, for instance, there was food distribution as an intervention, formal face-to-face surveys. So you have these administered research or evaluator administered surveys. You have online surveys whereby people can also tap in their gadgets and then answer. For instance, that is one most common methods that is now being used, considering there is limited accessibility even during corona virus pandemic. Okay, so some key issues to consider when you are doing using survey methods: the quantitative skills, quantitative rated skills of the evaluators, whether there is availability of baseline data that you can compare with afterwards to see whether there has been change or not. Time, if you have limited time to collect data, then you can employ the surveys. Sampling frame is very important. Remember issues of importance of sample size. Okay, the response rate, because it's not guaranteed that everyone who receives the questionnaire would respond to the questionnaire, or everyone who receives the questionnaire would respond to all questions. Okay, so there is that issue of response rate that might later affect your data. That is why it is always recommended that you have extra respondents beyond the actual sample size, so that you can be able to cater for those that would not respond. Okay. You have observation methods which are more helpful in understanding context better. Okay, you have structured in observation whereby evaluators have a checklist and then they use that checklist to keep ticking. Maybe they want to look at whether enough shelters are available for refugees or displaced people, and then you observe and tick. Okay. Or unstructured observation, whereby evaluators make observations through transit walks through maybe a refugee camp or a certain area that has been affected by maybe an earthquake or a volcano eruption. Maybe, for instance, if right now you look at the volcanic eruption maybe that happened in Western DRC, or in Spain, and then you look at what is happening, or the earthquake that happened in Haiti recently. If you visit, the evaluators visit, then they can be able to take a walk. Or even the other time when we had floods during earlier the year of 2021, floods in Europe, and evaluators could be able to move through transit walk to be able to evaluate and see the situation. So types of simple observation may include exterior physical signs or expressive movements of the response of those that you are targeting, physical location and space organizations, in situ conversations on site. You can converse with people on site. There is, of course, unobtrusive measures, methods used to avoid interfering with the lives of the affected people, especially if the people are traumatized and stressed by what the humanitarian situation that has happened. Maybe you don't want to engage them and maybe remind them of the situations that they experienced. So in this case, you use these obtrusive measures. For instance, you can monitor through page visits. You can use online or internet, use social media searches and see how people are posting about their situations, or search about certain information about what has happened in a certain area, because the media sometimes can do blogs and so and report what is happening in certain areas. There's learning-oriented methods, which are more usually participatory in nature, and they focus on topic and who, and also are more inclusive in nature. So in this case, the key techniques to effect reflective learning process include space where participants feel free to talk, simple open questions. You use simple open questions to be able to effect reflective learning. You use document learned lessons, good facilitations, and so on. So you have many examples of course, methods for learning oriented methods. Storytelling, people using metaphors. You ask about most significant changes only. People talk about how they've been able to change their lives through maybe certain humanitarian action. You have action after action review workshops whereby participants can come together and reflect on what they have been going through as the intervention and evaluation goes on. Bottom line is that we have a number of evaluation designs, sampling approaches, data collection methods, and the choice is done by the evaluation questions. Because at the end of the day, you want to supply the information that matches the demands of the primary intended users. But as you determine your designs, sample approaches and sampling approaches and data collection methods, consider the resources that you have in terms of budget, human resources and time, and consider the ethics, especially in relation to humanitarian principles and so on. Okay. Thank you. You can use some of these resources to inform your further reading. Thank you.